And we're live, I think. It's it's so good to be with you, Chanel, in the same room, apparently.
I know.
And thank you to everyone who is hanging out with us, invisible to us, which I still haven't gotten used to. But I am very glad to be with all of you guys tonight. And it's such a delight to be talking to Chanel Miller, the author of Know My Name, a New York Times bestseller, the winner of the National Book Award for Autobiography, and a book that just absolutely floored me from the first page. She's also an artist, as you guys probably know. She's been publishing amazing cartoons on Instagram and in places like the New Yorker, which I think makes us colleagues. She has a mural exhibited at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco that I believe she has not gotten to see because of, you know,
You
um,
know.
and to be corny for a second, Chanel is someone I admire for the monumental command and strength that she is known for, but possibly even more for the ways in her writing and in her art and in her life that she is searching and kind and open, and the way that what she does is imbued with an effort to see the world and see people with generosity and kindness and truth. So thank you for being with us today, Chanel.
Thanks, Gia. I'm so happy to be speaking with you tonight.
I think we're going to start. You're going to read a little bit from the afterword of the book, right? And
Yes.
and this is this is to celebrate the paperback of it,
Hmm.
but also just to hang out.
That's right. So I'll be reading some excerpts from the afterword. So I begin. In the victim realm, we speak of anonymity like a golden shield. To have maintained it for 4 years was a miracle. But while we discussed the protection it afforded, no one discussed the cost. Never to speak aloud who you are, what you're thinking, what's important to you. I was lonely. I longed to know what it was like not to have to spend all my energy concealing the most heated parts of me. I kept coming back to a line from one of Lao Tzu's poems. He who stands on tiptoe doesn't stand firm. I could not spend my life tiptoeing. All right, and on to another section. Deciding to use my name meant I'd have to learn to speak my story aloud. But as the requests for interviews began pouring in, I grew angry. My panic attacks returned, old unwanted feelings. I could feel myself losing my footing, slipping out of reality. I did not understand the difference between an interview and an interrogation. In court, the intention was to mock, disorient, diminish. It was never to listen. My lawyer introduced me to Laura and Hillary, two women who work in trauma-informed communications, who offered to help me prepare. They set up a digital camera, a light, a chair. I wore a starched shirt I'd bought, looked like a pilgrim at a job fair. At one point, Laura said, "What do you want them to hear from you?" I'd never been asked that before. She told me I wasn't at the mercy of the reporter's questions. I was showing up to deliver a message. This reframing changed everything. There was another question she asked that clung to me. Who are you speaking to? In 2001, a 16-year-old girl named Lindsay Armstrong was raped in Scotland. During trial, the defense attorney asked her to hold up the undies she'd been wearing at the time of the attack and to read aloud what was written on them. Little devil. The rapist was convicted, but guilty convictions don't undo damage. 3 weeks later, she killed herself. I wish I could tell her that when a question like that was posed, it was his sickness, not her weakness, that had been exposed. For so long, I worried that to be known meant to be undone. The more they see you, the more they can use against you. For years, I worried this was true. Upon finishing this book, I knew it was not. Not for me, not for Lindsay. I often question where men like the defense attorney get their confidence, while I'm the one who struggles with self-loathing, how they move unassailable through the world while I remain hidden. I decided that for as long as they're out there, I will be out there too. I will appear on every television screen across the nation, and I will not question my being there. I will be seen, open about everything I am and ever was, because I know that from the very beginning, the defense attorney had it wrong. To be known is to be loved. My first interview would be with 60 Minutes, the episode taped in August so it could air in September. I'd never been on camera, never been on a set, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter how prestigious the platform, didn't matter if it was 12 million viewers or two, didn't matter the heat of the honeycomb lamps or the gaze of the heavy black cameras. The night before the interview, while studying my notes, I drew a little devil on the back of my hand. In the morning, I slipped on a steamed blouse, stepped into a black SUV. I sipped my tea as they clipped a microphone to my waistband, powdered my cheeks. I stepped aside to find a sink, slowly washing the ink off my skin, thinking, thank you, as I began to feel bold and calm and clear. My purpose will always be greater than my fear. All of these cameras and correspondence were simply the vessel I needed in order to get to her. I was going to tell her, we get to wear whatever the fuck underwear we want. And then I have one final paragraph. Almost 5 years had passed since the assault, and I was finally going to meet the Swedes. On a warm summer evening in New York City, there's Peter, there's Carl. We embrace, sit down, order calamari. The conversation could only be described as sitting by a fire. One of them voices that he'd felt regret and guilt. For what? I say. For not coming 5 minutes sooner. I am laughing, realizing that even the saviors felt like they could have done better. I think about all the things we wish we could change, all the if onlys, all the different stories that could have played out. But for all the fear, the pain, all that could not be redeemed, what I'll remember for the rest of my days are the ones who never gave up on me, who led me back to my life. Thank you.
I could, I, I could honestly just sit here. I'm like, wait, read the whole thing, read the whole book, read the whole book to me right now. I actually, it's funny. All throughout quarantine, I've had a Thursday night movie club, and it was canceled. And I was like, oh, I can't do it tonight. I have a thing. And one of my friends was like, wait, you're going live with Chanel Miller. She's amazing in her audiobook. I'm like, movie club is off. We're all watching this. So I'm also going to listen to your audiobook now. Damn.
Hello, movie night fans.
Jesus. Is that afterward new for the paperback?
Yes.
Okay, because I was like, I don't remember this
quarantine.
You wrote it in quarantine?
Yes, I had to dissociate from the present and pretend I was still in a sane world.
Did you mention quarantine in it?
No.
Yeah. Well,
the ending would have been like, and then the world shut down and I'm not okay.
Yeah. We'll talk about our quarantine not okay later, but I'm interested in, so much of your book and what publishing it and what speaking about it is about are things and events and structures that alienate a person from herself, and the things and the people and the structures that knit her back together, right? And I was wondering, and I guess let's start by talking about what that process was like after you published it, like what the other things that happened after that first TV interview, right? Like you being in a situation like that, right? The SUV, the steamed blouse, the honeycomb lights, they are kind of, they can feel as cold as an airless courtroom, right? But you were exerting this effort to, as you said, be calm and bold and still be yourself in these settings. Like what was that process of, even just the process of becoming so widely known, but then trying to have yourself be widely known as yourself and not like a harder and glossier version. Like, talk to me about what the time since publication has been like.
Well,
pandemic excluded.
I went back and forth so many times on deciding to reveal my identity or not. I sat down with each of my family members, making sure that I had their blessing. It was very difficult for me to say, let's do this, even though I have no idea what the outcome will be, and trusting that I had the resources to take care of myself enough to take the next step. But I learned so much in the last year, mainly after that first 60 minutes interview. I was asked over 120 questions on the first day. Um, it was multiple hours long, mostly males in the room. And afterward, I didn't feel completely depleted. Like I
Mhm.
felt fatigued, but I wasn't hollowed out. I wasn't devastated. I took a bath. I went on a walk in the evening, and I realized it all had to do with the framing.
Mhm.
And when they were extracting the story from me, if I started to cry, my Vietnamese makeup artist, Allie, would literally book it across the room, shuffle, 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 pull out a little canister of tissues and be blotting my face. And then they'd want to keep rolling. She's like, no, I have to like fix this tiny little hair. I mean, there was so much care and attention to my presentation in a way that felt genuine and that centered around my well-being. And there's control and having the ability to pause. And they were feeding me. Like at one point, we're in this really intense moment. It's like, let's pause. And then they bring me a little menu and I get to click, I want wonton croutons and sesame seeds in my salad, you know, and it's like, oh, I'm the little queen in this
Mhm.
scenario, right? And I am bigger than the story I'm telling. So it's important to keep checking in with my needs, because the person telling the story is inside a body that needs to be fed, it needs to be warm, intended to. Whereas in court, it was like complete elimination of the body. And it's just like being constantly pummeled. And if you cry, then you need to figure out how to escape and then wipe your face raw with brown paper towels. Like
Mhm.
it
Oh
was
yeah.
so, yeah, it wasn't nourishing in any sense, but I think the important takeaway is that these stories of assault are not meant to be private, right? They're meant to be told and held inside a room. And it's all of our, we need to figure out how to extract these stories in a way that doesn't continue the damage, because I
Mhm.
know that that's possible. I know it doesn't have to be completely debilitating. And so it taught me that there's a different way to experience the telling of this story.
Mhm.
And I needed to feel that to know that it was true.
We've talked about the physical, like just the devastating physical environment of the courtroom on a trial like this. And it's one of the things that I you convey, so the airlessness of it. I mean, I've covered a couple of trials, and even just covering them, even just as an eye in those rooms, I feel, I, there's a way in which and you're right. It's the framing. It's watching what is happening to the people who take the stand that I like always leave feeling just so unequal to, even as an observer, like totally broken. And yeah, the paper towels in the bathroom and um, and I'm really glad to know that you felt cared for in the retelling of your story in a different framing. And it's kind of amazing, like, it's something that I know you're aware of, and something that I'm constantly aware of, is that the freedoms that we enjoy as women, of our cohort, of our rough generation, that um like how much had to happen, how many women had to do the work to get to the point that you could be treated like a real person who needed to be warm and fed in in that environment. And it's kind of amazing that you also, like, you writing anonymously, were one of those women that opened that space for yourself. It's like the anonymous version of you got to pave the way for the named version in this
Right,
really.
but then it elicited other people to come forward and make
Yeah.
me realize by watching their visibility that it might be possible for me to put a face to my name. So it was this like
Right.
circular effect.
It's very like Wrinkle in Time,
My
like.
window, hold on. Oy, oy, oy. Okay, we're back.
I so you started, so the 4 years that you were anonymous, as you were sort of processing and processing and writing, I'm sure at first just for yourself, or just as you're processing, what are the moments that you remember in those 4 years, the sort of like discursive landmarks that made you think that it would be more and more possible, and then not just possible but good, and then not just good but maybe healing, to come forward as yourself? Like, what are the moments that you remember being like, okay, because I feel really conscious of the way that just the conversation about sexual assault has changed so drastically. I mean, not just post Me Too, before it, like there are in my mind little landmarks, pieces of pop culture even. Like I was just watching I May Destroy You the other week, like catching up on it, and I was like, this in itself, like this is not possible without the last decade of just these stair steps of freedom that people have gotten. What are those moments for you?
Well, I know I went to so many book readings in those 3 years in San Francisco, and I would always go by myself and sit in the back of the room. And I remember, I grew up in these environments. I studied literature in college. I love hearing people read aloud. And an event would close and there'd be a little like smattering of applause. And I would tear up because I would look around and think, I will never have this. Like, I don't know how to ever be the person at the front of the room. That's how it felt at the beginning of the book. So I knew that I had a longing to reconnect. I just didn't understand how I'd get there. And then obviously Christine Ford, I remember the day after she testified, I was walking along the street and saw a newspaper stand, and all three newspapers had her on the front page. I bought all the newspapers. The guy was like, "You're the youngest person in my store to have ever bought a newspaper." and but but seeing her was important to me, and there was something so grounding. She was just so calmly strong in her convictions. And even though externally so much was coming at her and out of her control, she herself was unmovable in a way. And I felt like by then it had been a few years. And I felt like I had sort of fleshed myself out more and more. Like in court, the little person I was, like when we walk around, we look like we're inside our bodies, but I don't think we are. I think there was like a very tiny person running a control tower, and the rest of my limbs were just these like long robotic extensions. And it took me a long time to like grow all the way into my fingertips and into my toes and to feel everything in my body and be that present. So yeah, over time and through writing and through doing yoga and making myself physically stronger, I felt like I have enough that if something wants to come flooding in, I'm still a porous person, I'm still open, but there's not as much space inside me that's going to be filled up with external voices and opinions, because all the stuff that I've developed is fleshed out. Like there's no space for what you think about me, because now I know what I think.
I should have said this at the beginning, but we are going to do questions. I will not monopolize this conversation for the full hour. So anyone who's watching, I think there'll be like a little chat bubble for y'all to put questions in, and we'll go to them the last 15 minutes or so. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. But so you start the memoir by talking about shyness, like the sort of uh, about how you played grass in an elementary school safari play, and how when you go to a sleepover you would never leave a dent in the covers, and this just fundamental, like the truth about, like some deep internal truth about you that seems at odds with, or not seems at odds with, but shows kind of how much work and how unlikely, and how kind of heads off at the past the idea that this was anything about this was, I don't know, like natural or easy. Do you still feel like, now the you right now, how much do you still feel, to what degree do you still feel like the person who was grass in an elementary school play? Do you feel that self like still very vividly inside of you, or do you feel that you have become like kind of permanently more like your temperament has changed since publication or since writing or since 2015 in general? Or
Yeah, I'm still super unimposing. If I go to a book talk, I'll still sit in the back and take notes and probably not talk to anyone. It's just, it'll always be naturally who I am. I prefer to listen and observe, and I'm much more comfortable doing that. I think the difference is I was in a very contained courtroom environment where there were very strong characters who possessed voices. That had a lot of sway, right? It's like if we're all going toward a verdict, I had to figure out how to make my voice heard because the cost of not doing it was so high. So it's the first time I felt forced to speak. I mean, I would not have openly shared my writing prior to the victim impact statement. Um, but it was no longer an option to not say anything. And I'm realizing now that nothing is gained when I suppress my voice or when I'm too shy to share it. Because at the end of the day, I'm no longer in that contained space, but there are still very hostile voices dominating our culture and swaying people in some direction. If I don't figure out how to keep cultivating my voice, learning how to assert my opinion, then those are the voices that we're all living around. And I'm not content with that. And so my shyness, like I said in the afterword, it didn't matter if I was nervous or self-conscious because the cost of not speaking is so much greater and scarier. Um, and then at this point, in a strange way, because every vulnerability was exposed in that room, because people have already seen naked pictures of my body and I've cried in front of them, I go into almost everything I do thinking I've already done the hardest thing.
mm-hmm.
And there should be nothing keeping me from doing this next thing. And I hope to kind of keep that mindset for the rest of my life. So in a strange way, it set the bar.
Yeah.
It's like I survived that. Like I can ask for a little extra sugar in my coffee, and I'm
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
be
You can
fine.
ask for the half and half instead of just leaving the coffee
Yeah.
shop with the black coffee, which is another one of the examples. Thank you. Um, truly, I feel like I needed to hear, like, I feel like this rarely happens to me during book talks because, but like, yeah, I think it's hard for me to remember that even as someone who ostensibly tries to do this for, write and use their voice for a living, but like in just throughout this whole pandemic, I think I've been like, what could what could I have to say? Like this the sort of like epistemic mindfuck of it. I've been like, what is, and I think that simple equation that it's you can't afford to not speak when the people that are speaking tend to be so
And that there will always be someone saying something.
right.
And if great. Yeah.
Might as well be us, and this goes for
Yeah,
everyone
yeah, it
listening.
should be us.
But one of the things that I find so like, I would love to talk about drawing and writing as a way to find an identity that is stronger than the one that was placed on you by the extremely public nature of your assault. Because I want to know about what the the sort of the the leap of faith that it requires in your own self to say that what I can do with my writing, what I can do with my art is more powerful than this extremely strong public narrative that you were operating under. Because I think the thing that I thought immediately reading your book for the first time was that it's almost impossible. It's almost like cosmically unlikely to have a kind of talent that can outrun what you had to not outrun necessarily, but you know what I mean, that is stronger than what was put on you, but you have it, and you know that as a reader, like, page one. And it's like kind of a miracle that your talent is like this. But when you create anything, it's really hard to have that belief. Like, you had to overcome not just the ordinary thing of like, is what I have to say good or important or valid or worth doing. You had to kind of say, will it be strong enough to outpace anything else, to outpace anything else that happened in that courtroom, so that I am the full author of all of this. And like, I wonder if you could just talk about what that process was like to gain that confidence, or if it was just the daily effort built, ended up being the confidence in itself, just the practice
Yeah,
of writing or drawing. Yeah.
totally. I thought about that too. I was very stressed about time. I thought I have these seedlings of skills. I know I can draw, but I also know I haven't produced anything concrete that I could put on a resume and show you and say, see, I have this identity that will not be snuffed out. It's hard because the victim identity and the artist identity and writing identity were all very young, and they were all being cultivated at the same time, and I was sort of rushing to feed them at different times. Like while I was waiting for trial, I went and took an art class at the Rhode Island School of Design, and in an effort to feed that self and be like, don't die on me, I'm still looking out for you, I'm just going to be away for a while doing this court stuff. And then while I was writing the book, it was extremely miserable at times. So at night, I signed up for a narrative illustration class, basically comic book making, and would finish my pages and get in my little Prius and drive to the harbor and be with 8 other people making diary comics about my day and the dog that I was fostering. And I felt like that was secretly my plan B. Like I was cultivating this other path at the same time my book was leading me toward this inevitable outburst and like thrust into the world of public victim. I also was developing my cartooning skills. So I was thinking about that. And then, I had so much, I talked about how I love working with kids. And the nervousness I had about not being able to transition to a darker world about assault to a kid's realm. But then zooming out even more, I thought if someone is really narrow-minded enough to box me in like that, then they're denying something about humanity, which is that these things can't be so neatly separated. And there's layers of childhood that are so difficult and hard to talk about. And I just had to let go of the idea that this is too much for people to take on or for them to digest. And I also realized that I had found a way to digest it. And so
Right.
if people can't find a way to listen to it or to make room for me to create different narratives, then what the heck?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
How this is, as someone that cannot draw whatsoever, I'm this is like, I'm wondering how, I am just truly curious about how the process differs from one to the other. Like do you because I was thinking, like, when I'm writing, it is often translating an image or a feeling into words. But then I'm wondering how often when you are cartooning, you are like, does it ever work? Is it like you're taking an image and making an image, or you have words that you're like, how does the act of getting something on paper differ from one medium to the other for you?
Totally. Well, I feel like writing for me is so arduous and time consuming, and it's like coding. Like you're
Hmm.
moving little letters around, like, oh, the feeling
Hmm.
doesn't hit right. And when I like reconfigure these 26 letters, something internal is going to burst and it's going to be right. Whereas drawing, there's so many less rules around it. I don't think as much when I'm drawing, and that's sort of what I like about it. Like I draw to figure out what I'm thinking. I remember in high school, the fact that I would draw little characters like urinating on graphs or like
Hmm.
cutting up a little number with a tiny knife. I was like, oh, clearly this, I'm angry that I'm in this class. It's like but I can doodle for hours and then look back at my doodles and be like, huh, that's
It's funny. You decode. That's how I feel about writing, actually. I mean, and I also feel that it is
Ooh.
arduous and bad, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny to, well, you write in the memoir, right, that before you started writing the victim impact statement, you had drawn all night, basically.
Yes.
Like it's like one is a loosening.
Yes.
And the
Oh,
other is,
absolutely.
yeah,
It is like
the precision.
it's like an unspooling of my brain.
What's your favorite figure in that drawing that you did before writing the statement? Is there one that you like feel really
There's a little slug wearing a scarf. I'm just like,
nice?
you're so sweet.
What
There's
kind of a scarf is it? Is it a plain scarf? Is it pattern?
I think it was striped.
Nice.
I started coloring it in, like it was this huge black and white piece, and I started painting in all the little things. And Lucas was like, "Are you procrastinating writing your statement?" I was like, "I must keep coloring," but I stopped.
And now you have, let's talk about the mural that you have up at the Asian Art Museum. Also, you have to give me, I 9 weeks ago, I had a baby. I have a half Asian baby who looks extremely white. So you have to give me tips on how I can make my half Asian baby connected to her culture.
I'm so nervous about that. I'm so nervous about my little Asian genes like getting diluted and just slipping into the abyss.
I'm already like, I remember like when I was working at Jezebel, I wrote this whole blog about how Emma Stone was playing like a half Asian person.
Oh,
I was like, yeah, fuck, that's so unrealistic. And I'm looking at my baby like, yes.
Are you Emma Stone?
My favorite, one of my favorite things to do is say Emma Stone like an Italian person saying I'm stoned. Anyway. But you had said like you had said on your Instagram, I like you were talking about this mural, like just talk about it generally and like what it is to have something up at the Asian Art Museum for you. I also saw that you were a fan of Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Hong, which is just,
come on,
I
so
mean,
good.
yeah, I think maybe the best nonfiction book I will read this year. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, first of all, even the being called to do the piece, like being
Yeah.
brought into a meeting and saying, what do you want me to do? And they're like, we want you to fill this whole wall. And I was
Yeah,
like,
what did that feel like?
Yeah, like I said, does it have to be related to my assault? And they're like, no. And so I think that's so amazing. I mean, that's someone actively cutting something I'm tethered to or feared that I would be forever tethered to. And again, creating literal blank space for me to fill, and helping me continue my story, right? My story doesn't end with the end of the book and the conclusion of the case. Like there's so much more to say. And I think that's true for all survivors. Like we all have random interests and talents that we don't usually have the space to talk about.
Right.
And so that was an amazing feeling. I got to go home and make dozens of drawings, like bundle them in my arms, like shuffle back to the museum, lay them out across the table. We talk through each one, think about what's best for the space. I loved working with other people. Writing was so solitary. It kind of gave me a peek into what it would be like. Just being like, this is who I am and this is what I'm doing. What do you think? Because writing was so by myself for so long. Yeah, I can't wait to see it in person. And it's amazing that it's at the Asian Art Museum. Like that's a big deal. And I think I was slow to awaken into my like Asian identity. I know it was something that was overlooked during my case and something that I had to keep pointing to be like, this is important. And I'm still trying to figure out how to tell you why it is, but I know it is based on my lived experience. So it's amazing. I mean, that I hope they have shown how much space we're allowed to, we should be made to take up.
It's nice how like just we'll give you this whole wall and it'll just be there, like this sort of metaphorical and like the non-metaphorical, just literal freedom of that. Like we will, like, all of this is yours to do anything you want with. I'm sure that felt, I mean, like, how, what an
Absolutely.
amazing thing.
And it's like, what does your brain want to spit out?
Yeah.
Because we're going to make that happen. I mean, what a gift.
We and like, we've got like 10 minutes before we'll switch to audience questions, but so we have to, I feel like we must acknowledge, because we are talking virtually rather than, in San Francisco together and like able to get a cocktail afterwards, which I still am so sad about, because then you could go see your piece. Is, we're in the middle of this, we're in month 7 or 8 of this pandemic that has, you know killed hundreds of thousands of people and economically devastated so many people in this country. And like, we're at an all-time and a totally absurd low point of federal leadership. And, I just want, like, vis-a-vis all of that, like, how are you? What, have you picked up any? So let's just talk about the vibes the last 7 months, like the existential vibes, the personal vibes, the creative ones. Have you picked up any strange habits? Has there anything been, like, I'm curious about this, the greatest sources of like surprise and joy, and also, like, I don't know, despair and difficulty for you in the past like 7 months.
Yeah. I mean, I think the assault was almost 6 years ago. And the way I think about it was like something blocked the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, dang, now I have to, it is my duty to figure out how to unblock it. And that's what I spent the last 6 years doing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've really, that has been one of the central stories in my life that I've orbited around. And I I had signed up to do so many talks this year and take 1 bajillion flagillion flights, and then everything came to a halt. And I've had the time to think about this time in my life and how, kind of reassessing why I said yes to everything and thinking about where that came from. Am I doing it out of a sense of obligation or guilt? And I sort of felt like, well, I have to show up for survivors now, right? You can't show up on the scene and disappear. You also want to be grateful. If you're in a position to help, you should. But then I also thought the ending of my book is about finally putting something down so that I may carry on with my life. And it's not where I started. I don't get to go back to that point of graduating college and having everything before me. Like, I'll never get those 6 years back. But I do have this moment in time where, for the first time in a long time, I have the agency to choose what I do next. And I think it's really important to protect that time, to really think about it for myself and try to listen to where I want to go. And in some ways, I hope that for now will be my form of activism, because I could go to all these events and conferences and speak directly to survivors, or I could embody the message that the assault doesn't have to rule your life, right? It doesn't have to be your central narrative and the only thing that you can speak to. And so if I go off, even if I write a book about like a goose, with like polka dot eggs, that to me is moving, because it shows that what I said is true, that your life carries on in whichever direction you now get to decide. And so I'm deliberately going to honor it. And I think if the brakes hadn't been pulled on the world, I would have been still in full momentum, probably really burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
But I can hear myself better in this quiet, even though it's a very like melancholy and terrifying quiet. I think it's important that now I move forward with more deliberation than before.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about that, because I mean, it is like you have done such a remarkable job of remaining like very, very, very human at these increasingly high levels of visibility, which is tough. very, very, very hard to do when people expect so many things of you, or like, when you become a figurehead for good reason, right? And it's very tough to remain human as a figurehead. And not to say that I'm glad for you that you've had this, this horrific devastation give you some more time to think, but like, I think it's true that it would have been another version of it would have been interesting and probably very difficult to continue to try to remain human on a speaking tour, because there's something about, like, even just in my experience writing about sexual assault, you have to muster a sort of public strength, and when you are hearing so many people's stories and you are there for so many people's stories, that to me, like, seesaws between making me feel more connected to myself than ever, and also like distancing me from myself at the same time. Like it seesaws back and forth, and it's very hard for me to navigate personally.
Totally. Yeah, it's something I was still figuring out how to do. And I think it's important to keep, again, feeding the different selves. And I think that one self was on like level 100, full speed ahead. And
you're right. The book about the goose with the polka dot eggs. I mean, it is like, it's the great thing about a book is that it always will be there, right? It's like your voice, like your voice will always be available to anyone who wants it, and it will be right in front of, like, that's the amazing thing about it. And it will, and yeah, you have already done all the work that you ever need to do.
Right.
Okay, and we're getting some audience questions. So, all right. From an anonymous audience person. I love the part in the book on doing stand-up. How did that help you conquer aspects of your shyness and find your voice? If it did, would you ever revive your comedy career, ever do stand-up again?
Again, it's the context of the microphone. So testifying, hated the microphone, hated that it picked up on every sound and sniffle that I was making. I felt pinned to it, couldn't breathe around it, versus I'm backstage, there's a microphone on stage, on a stand in a spotlight. I love the feeling of walking toward it and being like, I'm about to dominate this space and everyone has to shut up, right? For the next 10 minutes, this space is owned by me. Even if I do poorly, I'm still dictating the tone and I'm the only voice in the room. And so that was a really healthy experience. Getting to be more vulgar and make inappropriate jokes was extremely liberating, because I had to, be like polite and level-headed and not nasty when I was in court. And so that was humanizing. Would I ever do it again? I don't, a lot of really terrible things are quite funny. Like, when the pain is not like directly sitting on you and it's a little bit off, then you're like, that was so bad. Like, we had days where we were like, damn, this is crazy. So yeah, I wouldn't cancel it out. I continue to have like all doors open. So
here's a question from a junior in high school who says, I deal with rape culture way too often. Do you have any advice on how to survive the rape culture of high school and college?
Dang.
That's a real one. It's fucking real, man. It's
I know.
rough as hell.
I'm almost like,
it's rough as hell. I was going back through my high school live journal and I was stunned. I mean, there were all sorts of things that were fucked about high school that you record in those things high school and college, where you look at it later and you're like, oh, all these things we thought were normal. But for me, I was surprised at how common rape jokes were. Like we were like, oh, it was like, not only was, I don't think I even knew the word sexual assault in high school, but like rape was just very funny. Like it was like a thing that people joked about all the time that I didn't remember.
Yeah. Yeah, in your book, you talk about tests of, I don't even know how to pronounce it, derderbadils.
Yeah, terrible. I don't know either.
Derbadils.
Yeah.
And that had rape in it. And I was like, I don't remember that reading that part in high school.
Yeah.
I read that book. But I'm saying that the fact that she's even asking this question is actually a good signal to me, because that means that you're actually dealing with it, and you're like, I'm having to confront this problem, whereas we were inside the problem and didn't even have language for it yet until we had graduated college and like looked back and was like rubbing down that rosy like fear and being like, whoa, there was so much that was wrong. So it makes me encourage that you are cognizant of it, and training yourself to be a voice for good. So I think just the knowledge, even though it's uncomfortable knowledge, it's so necessary. So thank you. Thank you for being aware.
Yeah, there's something about, I mean, all that, what a lot of what we're talking about is how just even naming something with clarity. And you know, and I think to me this goes beyond like the term rape culture as maybe this question and asker is finding, like, is something like, you know, your ability to name exactly what you're seeing and to, you know, continue to see it with exactitude and to describe it to yourself, to your friends, in writing any way you want with exactitude. I mean, it's like that's this whole game, right? Like that's the reason that either of us were able to write anything we've written, is because people naming other things that we've dealt with
Yes.
exactitude. It's um like, and this question is itself like the way forward, I think.
Totally. And I would also say, as a high schooler, don't undermine yourself because you are young. I would say take your emotions seriously, your gut instincts seriously. Don't repress them over time. If you walk into a room with suited men, it doesn't mean they're smarter just because they're wearing like tailored suits or have multiple degrees and you haven't graduated from high school yet. Like, you possess some type of clarity, some type of vision of what can be better. So don't let their opinions override yours just because they're older or more educated. I feel like that's something that I had to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd had to unlearn a lot of deference that I feel like I haven't like quite
That
unlearned. Um,
deference.
did you have any stories you turned to for models of how to tell your story? Stories that opened the door for you to tell yours, speaking of what we were just talking about.
Mm. Oh, so many. Well, I mean, just reading, it was interesting. Every time I read a book about sexual assault or something that was related, I'd tell my editor and be like, I read this, like I'm doing my homework. And she's like, you know, you don't only have to read about sexual assault, right? And she's like, this is a story. Like, it's a story about your life. And so you can read anything. You can read sci-fi, horror, like just studying the way things slowly unfold, slight disturbances. All of that is so valuable. Fantasy, like revenge fantasies, whatever you want to do. It was weird. I was like pigeonholing myself without even realizing it. And so when I think about telling my story of assault, it was more just like, how do you tell the story of who you are? And like integrating the story of the assault within the context of your life. And again, all of our stories, they may sound similar, but there's the way we react to them is different. You know, my editor asked me about other formative or traumatic events in my life and had me reassess or assess how I responded to those. Do you shut down? Do you immediately run to someone? Like, we all process things differently. And it's unique to you, you know? So I would just remember that it's not an assault story. It's your narrative where there happened to be an assault. Um, but you can make it more colorful. You can make it incorporate all kinds of other details that are just about who you are and how you process things.
I'm realizing this is something that I just don't know. Was it, how long was it on the table that you might publish anonymously?
Oh, until like
Like
mid
the end.
2019. It was like, I think I'm going to email in my final manuscript now. I was like, should I control F and take out all the Chanels and replace it with Emily? Like it was
Yeah. How
until the
did,
very last minute of like going to press, I didn't know.
but you wrote it for most of the time that you were writing it. Did you write it with your name or did you go back and forth?
Yes, I wrote it with my name, but even at the publishing house, like nobody, when I came into the office, nobody knew who I was. Like it
Yeah.
was kept super under wraps. Even
Yeah.
when we were doing covers, trying them out, they all said Emily Doe on the front.
Uh-huh.
Um,
What was it like to look at the covers with Emily Doe on the front where the author's name would be? Like how did it feel?
really, I mean, it like feels really good to hear my name. I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh, I like that. You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
Was the title going to be different when it was possibly not your name on the front, right?
I was
Like
gonna do Emily Doe by Chanel Miller.
yeah. Oh, that's really good. That's really good.
Yeah, in one of my other talks, I talked about how I wanted to name it tadpole because there's a tadpole metaphor in there, but that's like too.
Tadpole's really good too.
It's like a strong word, but then
Yeah.
everyone's like, "What is that?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow,
Did
that's
you know the name? I know where your title came from because you talk about the quote where it came from, but trick
well,
me.
that actually the title, the alternate title for my book for a while I thought that, or maybe no, I came upon Trick Mirror pretty quickly, even though like I can't say the word mirror correctly. Like I like say like
Mirror.
mirror. Yeah, like it's like trips me up. Um, but I didn't remember that I had used it as like the closing line in an essay until I was Googling like Jia Tolentino Trick Mirror to see like if the page had gone up on my publisher, like if it was up yet as like with something with an ISBN number. And I found it in another piece I written. I was like, oh, I guess I repeat myself.
Interesting.
Um,
Yeah, my editor told me to know my name on a piece of paper, put it somewhere visible. I taped it to my refrigerator. She's like, get used to seeing it, to saying
mhm.
it, because you're going to be saying it a lot.
I think you ended up with the perfect title, even though Tadpole's good. Tadpole's good.
I know.
Tadpole's a
Maybe
good
my
one.
next book, it'll be about a goose and a
And
tadpole.
Tadpole, yeah. It can be the Tadpole series. So this is a question for both of us. Do you both feel that you have to work harder than others to carve your own path as writers? Do you think that you have to be more distinctive because you have Asian American voices?
I in your book, you talk about a moment where you were role playing Power Rangers and your friend informed you had to be the Yellow Ranger, and you were sort of like you realized there were limits.
Which actually I didn't realize till after that. Someone finally was like, wait, Gia, the Yellow Ranger is white, the Pink Ranger is Asian. And I was like, oh, so my friend was being extra racist. Anyway, sorry.
So I think what do you think?
The term Asian American is something that and this is why, everyone should go out and read Kathy Park Hong's Minor Feelings, because it is one of the best books about how you navigate the complexity of identity generally. I mean, it's about Asian American identity, but it's, the term itself is so vexed and complicated. It's effectively an invented umbrella term. There is no, like, the term Asian American encompasses so many different registers of socioeconomics, demographics, like it's hard to say. Like it's always just an extremely complicated thing to describe any category of people as Asian American, to say that you're representative of anything in this necessarily incredibly complicated category. This is one of those things that I try not to ever think about. I try mostly vis-a-vis the angle of this question to think about all the ways in which I'm luckier at this point of time than I would have been at any other point in time as a young Asian woman, like I feel incredibly conscious of how the fact that, I could have gone from a job blogging about feminism in extremely vulgar terms and like as my real self for at Jezebel, to getting hired by the New Yorker to write the exact same stuff, but not as like not necessarily as, you know, like this is our resident feminist, just as this is a point of view that is going to be in the mainstream media because, you know, what is mainstream is getting closer to genuinely valuing diversity for editorial reasons and not just, you know, like demographic or tokenizing ones. And that's something that I feel, you know, like that is a gift that I have always felt, and maybe this is my inherent deference that I have yet to scrub out, that I've always felt is more than worth the price of like people being racist sometimes. You know, like the fact that anyone who is like anyone who's really in it understands that, you know, that young people's voices are necessary, and not that I'm calling myself young anymore, that that you know that non-white people need to be, you know, not just in the conversation but often at the center of it. And
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it did make me slower when it came to centering myself. I think
Yeah, that's probably true for me too, I'm sure.
yeah. Um, I'm aware of the stories that are missing. I feel like all the Asian Americans I know, my family, my mom, like characters that are so unique and vibrant to me that I don't get to see immortalized on screens or in stories.
Mhm.
Um, some pressure on myself to fill that gap. I think
Mhm.
about even this book, there's like a lot of requests to turn it into a movie, which I'm
Mhm.
at the moment not eager to do. But then I think, well, it would be nice to have a mixed Chinese American protagonist at the center.
Right.
So I do think about it in terms of as a storyteller in society, um, what stories I'll be telling moving forward.
Yeah. I that this was something that I became, and I don't know if it was like for me, I didn't realize until I went on book tour how conscious, how very like particularly conscious and grateful I would be for Asians and Asian women in particular in the crowd. Like I felt so like remarkably, surprisingly, just like so honored by that,
Yes,
you know?
totally. Honored, calmed, seen.
Yeah,
I feel it
calmed. Yeah.
too. Even when I have like an Asian makeup artist, she's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I got this. I got your skin tone. I got
Oh
your round
yeah.
face. Like I know
Yeah.
how to do contours on this
Yeah.
flatness."
Yeah.
Like it's like it's there's unspoken shorthand that comes along with it.
Yeah.
That you do feel a little bit of warmth and ignition when you're in it, and you're like, wouldn't that be nice to have more? And I even think about the courtroom being predominantly white, and it's like, what would it have felt like if the judge was Asian and the defense attorney was Asian? And I know having a young Iranian American woman as my prosecutor helped. You know, she was like, I got you, and I trusted that. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. That's a great question. Okay, let's see. Where do you find creative community these days?
Literally through this little freaking box.
I know.
um no, it's so nice. Honestly, I was isolated for so long and like creatively lonely because I couldn't share with anyone what I was working on, like past drafts back and forth. And so everything to me now is better than it was before. I still think I'm learning to even like use the people around me. Like I'm not used to doing that or like reaching out to people or getting opinions. And so I'm trying to make myself, yeah, just remember that I have a community. And I think it's weird because I was alone for a few years in a room, and now I'm alone all year in my room, you know. And it's like things drastically changed for a while, but then um but I have to keep checking in and being like, remember, there's all these people out there you can talk to now. What about you?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like everything needs to be perfectly honest, you know, like who knows these days? Like
Yeah.
it's, I mean, I hardly feel uh I feel like I mean, as someone that has always really relied on the grounding nature of just like physical embodiment around other people to like direct my instincts about even the news. Like early in the pandemic, I just completely lost my ability to understand the vibe, I think, of the world because I was locked in my room. Like there's something without being physical. I have had a hard time figuring out um, how to how to like use the same facilities, creatively and intellectually when I'm physically in the same space. Because I think like I'm such I rely on my instincts, I rely on my physical feelings to understand things that are happening. And I feel like I didn't have clarity on anything except for like the protest this summer because I was physically there. Like
Yes.
it often feels like I just don't. And with reporting, it's so hard to understand something unless you're physically present for me. That yeah, I don't know. I mean,
It
definitely
is
I
hard.
have felt, but it's like the internet's all we have now.
I know. Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like I would do talks which require a lot of like vulnerable content. And I feel like if I was in a room and it was quiet and I could read that people were actively absorbing it, then I'm willing to open up more because I want to give them that because they're
Yeah.
receiving it so nicely.
Whereas
And
everyone
there's
that's listening right now could just be arms crossed, just like, damn, I don't know about
yeah,
these two.
like ooh.
Yeah, it's
And usually
strange.
like after I do an interview, I'll get an email from a producer like, that was great. And I'll be like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The internet has made me like the internet these days, now that it has kind of expanded to be our entire world, I have felt more grateful for talking to just complete, like one thing that I've missed throughout the pandemic is just interactions with strangers, like surprise in general. It's harder to come by. Like I feel surprise when you're physically in your room. And for that, I think like I felt glad for any time that I've had like a conversation with a stranger, whether it's like reporting or like a random message. It's been
Totally.
like those connections feel really important.
You're like anything at this point.
Yeah, I'll take any interaction with
Any
anyone at this
stranger,
point.
please DM me.
Yeah.
So hungry.
um, okay, what are you both? Well, two questions. What have been some of both your favorite books of 2020, and what are you both reading right now? Good question. Favorite books of 2020. What a year.
Minor Feelings,
Minor Feelings
Weather,
is so good. Weather is devastating.
Welcome to the Dream House. In the
Oh
Dream.
yeah. Did that come out this year? Or
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's so good.
Oh, it was freaking good. In the Dream House. Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio is so good. One of the best memoirs I've read this year. Have you read it?
No.
It's really
That is
good. I
not.
think you would love it. I think you would love it. What else?
Oh, two, I like to highlight What We Become in Flight and Good Morning, Destroyer of Men's Souls.
I haven't read either of those. I
Yeah.
will read those.
Note it.
I loved. Have you read How Much of These Hills is Gold?
Oh, see, Pam.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. I've not read it, but I'm going to because it's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I was saving it. Like I knew I had a very strong feeling that I would really like the book, but
Yes.
like I often save books till I feel like it's like I feel like about books like I feel about food. Like it's like I want to line up my craving with exactly what I'm reading. And that one I was like, I need to be specifically in the mood for like the surreal reimagined Western with Chinese Americans at the center set in, the 1800s. And I read it like 2 days after I gave birth with like a baby. And I was like, this was the best idea I've ever had. And also the fucking worst because I was just sobbing, you know what I mean? Like thinking about like tenderness and vulnerability and care, just like, like dying. It was so
Sloan was
good.
like 48 hours fresh into the world. She's like, hey, do you mind like
And
after
I'm like
chapter
reading a book with a
checking
dead
in?
body bouncing in a car. Like I was just
Yeah.
like, what the fuck? I love this book, Pizza Girl. Like that's another good one for
Oh,
this
the
year.
author is half Asian, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another good one. I've been doing a lot of therapeutic rereading personally. Like I reread Never Let Me Go, which really soothed me, and I've reread. I've been reading like all of Junpei Lahiri's books because I used to read those in high school and college. Have you been doing the reread?
Oh my gosh. On a trip to Cape Cod with my parents, it was
Oh
like,
yeah.
jump here. Every
It's
bookstore I was like, snatched it.
those books, it feels like to me, it feels like coming home like on Christmas break from college and like sitting down in my bedroom and like eating a sandwich. Like they're so.
Well, that's literally, I mean, even the writing, she was like, then she soaked the bowl so that the
Yeah, they're so
little oat
physical.
grains wouldn't stick and harden to the bowl.
Yep,
It's like,
yep.
yes, that little
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah, it's like I needed soothing reminders of actual objects.
Lived life.
I also liked Pew by Catherine Lacey. Oh, there have been so many good books this year, but I went through a period this summer where all I was reading about was prison reform, and yeah, my reading this year has been just all over the map.
Oh, truly.
Yeah. Okay, let's do one more question before we wrap it up. Well, the last question in here is about men, so maybe I'll skip it. I guess, okay, I'll close with, let's close with just something that you've talked about finding ways to be more solid, to be more yourself. You talked about yoga and writing. There's sort of these daily things. Um, and just, one of the things that I just truly am like really admire about you is that it would have been so easy to just sort of harden and glossify up into a symbol, and the way you've handled, standing for something for so many people while also staying soft and, like always having the possibility of writing a book about a goose with polka dot eggs, and like, and what I think it's hard to do that generally. I think that this is just a hard thing to do as a human. I think so much about the world is set up to harden us and to make us want to be more, kind of um, consistent in an unhelpful way and to be more kind of ossified in whatever niche has been established for us by demographics and capitalism and anything, right? And I guess just that seems so important to you. And how, like, how did that become so important to you? And what else do you do just on a daily basis to keep that a priority in your like creative and personal life?
Yeah, I mean, a lot that I learned through writing the book was that I was equal parts processing, if not more, devoting time to literally being ravaged by feeling. And that was work. Like, that was taking a toll on me. And I showed up for that and felt everything the same way I show up at a desk to write. I was showing up to every feeling every day and trying not to suppress anything. So that, that was like forcing me to stay open. Now, I think my success comes from recognizing when things flare up and recognizing that I'm not going to be as productive during that period, and that I'm going to need more care than I usually do. Um, I think the reason why I'm able to do work is only because I learned how to take care of myself, not because I worked harder, not because I became more focused, but it's because I care more about taking care of myself and tending to feelings when they arise and being like, something's happening, something's trying to tell me something. And also, my piece in the Asian Art Museum was about just like the circular nature of things, the nonlinear nature of things. I think I was writing the book toward coming out on the other end. I do a lot of calculating, like, well, it's been 6 years since this, and that means I'm here. But accepting that different things will resurface at different times. Um, and I just listen to that. And like, I feel like the beginning of my adult life happened with this insane eruption. Um, but if you follow the like contours of that wound, you sort of end up where you need to be going. And so I'm less afraid of these eruptions, like when things don't go the way they're planned or when your schedule gets annihilated. I've learned that it's not the end, but your story is changing and it is arduous to adjust. But that's like all we should be learning to do is adjustments rather than like adjustments while remaining open. And hopefully you'll just kind of flow into the right creek.
Like a tadpole.
Yeah.
Followed by a goose laying polka dot eggs. And cut. Just kidding. Yeah, that was, I think we should end on that note. Thank you, Chanel, for talking to me. And thank you to City Arts for having us and making this all possible. And thank you to everyone hanging out with us. I hope you haven't been just shaking your heads at, just
Muting us.
But yeah, thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Jia. I think you're so brilliant. And I loved spending the evening with you with all our anonymous attendees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.